Jasmine Williams' cheek stung as Captain Bradley towered over her, his palm still raised. "First class isn't for your kind," he sneered. The cabin froze. Little did he know, the black woman he'd just assaulted wasn't just a passenger, she owned 70% of Skyline Airways. Before we dive into this shocking story, where are you watching from today? Hit that like button and subscribe if you've ever witnessed someone severely underestimating another person. You won't believe what happens next when this racist pilot discovers who he just slapped. The morning had started perfectly for Jasmine Williams. At 35, she had just achieved what many considered impossible, acquiring majority ownership of Skyline Airways, one of America's most prestigious carriers. The ink had barely dried on the contract transferring 70% of the company's shares to her name. After building Terra Nova Tech from her apartment into a billion-dollar empire, Jasmine was ready for a new challenge. "Congratulations, Ms. Williams," her attorney had said just yesterday, sliding the final ownership papers across the polished conference table. "You now own an airline." But Jasmine wasn't one to celebrate from an ivory tower. Success hadn't changed her fundamental approach to business: understand the customer experience firsthand. That's why today, instead of announcing her ownership with press releases and champagne, she was boarding Skyline Airways Flight 372 from Atlanta to San Francisco like any other passenger. "I need to see how things really operate," she had explained to her assistant that morning. "No special treatment, no announcements. Just book me a regular economy ticket." What Jasmine didn't anticipate was that the airline's computer system would recognize her status. Not as the new owner, that information was still confidential, but as a platinum-level frequent flyer. When she checked in at the kiosk, a notification appeared on her screen: complimentary upgrade to first class. Jasmine considered declining. Her plan had been to experience the economy section, where most customers flew. But the upgrade provided an unexpected opportunity to evaluate the premium service as well. She accepted, making a mental note to book another flight in economy soon. She dressed deliberately for anonymity: faded jeans, white sneakers, and a navy hoodie with her natural hair pulled back in a simple style. No designer labels, minimal jewelry, nothing that screamed tech mogul. The casual outfit was comfortable for the 5-hour flight and perfect for her incognito mission. As Jasmine navigated through Atlanta's bustling terminal, she observed everything with a critical eye. The signage was confusing in some areas. The boarding process seemed inefficient. She made mental notes, already envisioning improvements. Meanwhile, in the cockpit of the Boeing 787, Captain Thomas Bradley was reviewing his flight plan. At 58, Bradley had flown for Skyline for nearly 3 decades. With his silver hair and commanding presence, he considered himself the unofficial face of the airline. His starched uniform bore numerous pins and medals, some officially sanctioned, others he'd added himself to enhance his authoritative image. "Captain, coffee?" Flight attendant Darren Phillips appeared at the cockpit door, holding out a steaming cup. "Thanks, son," Bradley replied, taking the cup. He'd taken a liking to Darren, ambitious, respectful of hierarchy, and most importantly, someone who understood Bradley's perspective on maintaining Skyline's prestigious reputation. "First class is almost fully boarded," Darren reported. "Though there's someone in 2A who doesn't quite fit the profile." Bradley looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" "Just, not our usual first-class demographic," Darren said carefully. "Wearing a hoodie and jeans. Seemed surprised about the upgrade too." Bradley's jaw tightened. He took pride in Skyline's exclusive image, particularly in first class. "I'll handle it," he said dismissively. "Probably some employee flying on benefits who got lucky with an upgrade." Darren nodded and returned to his duties, leaving Bradley scowling. In his mind, first class had standards that went beyond the price of a ticket. He'd spent years cultivating relationships with Skyline's elite passengers, learning their preferences and making them feel special. An outsider disrupted that carefully maintained atmosphere. When Bradley emerged from the cockpit for his customary pre-flight walkthrough, his eyes immediately found Jasmine in seat 2A. She was reading something on her tablet, seemingly oblivious to the sideways glances from other first-class passengers in their business attire. The first-class cabin gleamed with luxury, wide leather seats, wood grain finishes, crystal glasses already filled with pre-departure champagne. Bradley noted with disapproval that Jasmine had water instead. The other first-class passengers, predominantly white, predominantly male, predominantly in business suits, created a uniform backdrop that made Jasmine stand out even more. Bradley observed several exchanging knowing looks, their expressions mirroring his own thoughts. Jasmine felt the tension but remained focused on her task. She noticed how the flight attendants spent more time chatting with the other first-class passengers, the subtle difference in their tone when addressing her versus the businessman across the aisle. These were exactly the kinds of details she had come to observe, though she hadn't expected them to manifest quite so blatantly. She made notes on her tablet, not just about the service disparities but also about the cabin layout, the amenities, the boarding process. As the new owner, she was already planning improvements. If only she knew how much this flight would reveal about exactly what needed changing at Skyline Airways. The cabin crew announced final preparations for takeoff. Passengers fastened seatbelts and powered down devices as the safety demonstration began. Captain Bradley, however, hadn't returned to the cockpit. Instead, he lingered in first class, shaking hands and exchanging pleasantries with select passengers. "Mr. Henderson, good to see you again. How was London?" Bradley clasped the hand of a middle-aged white man in seat 1C. "Profitable, Thomas, very profitable," Henderson laughed. "Mrs. Sinclair, lovely as always. Is your husband joining you in San Francisco?" Bradley continued to the elegant woman in 1D. One by one, Bradley greeted every first-class passenger, except Jasmine. When he reached her row, his eyes slid past her to the white gentleman in 2B. The deliberate snub created an uncomfortable atmosphere that rippled through the cabin. Jasmine observed this interaction carefully, making mental notes about the captain's behavior. As a successful black woman in tech, she was no stranger to being overlooked or dismissed. But as the new owner of Skyline Airways, she found this particularly relevant to her evaluation. When the flight attendants began their pre-takeoff service, Jasmine politely requested a glass of water. "I'll be right back with that," the attendant said before turning to assist other passengers. 10 minutes passed, and no water appeared. Jasmine noticed the same attendant had served 3 other passengers in that time. "Excuse me," she tried again when the attendant passed by. "Could I please have that water?" "Just a moment," came the reply, but still no water materialized. From across the aisle, a man in an expensive suit muttered just loud enough to be heard, "They let anyone into first class these days. Probably used points from her welfare card." Instead of addressing this blatantly racist remark, Captain Bradley, who was still in the cabin, chuckled appreciatively. The sound carried clearly to Jasmine's seat. Maintaining her composure, Jasmine unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up. If the service wouldn't come to her, she would find a flight attendant herself. She'd experienced subtle discrimination before, but this was becoming egregious. As the new owner, she needed to understand exactly how deep these problems ran. Before she could take 2 steps, Captain Bradley intercepted her path. "Ma'am, the seatbelt sign is illuminated," he said, his voice carrying an edge of authority that hadn't been present when he addressed the other passengers. "I'm aware, Captain. I've been trying to get some water for the past 15 minutes, Jasmine replied calmly. "You'll need to return to your seat," Bradley insisted, ignoring her explanation. "I will, as soon as I speak with a flight attendant." Bradley's expression hardened. "May I see your boarding pass, please?" Jasmine raised an eyebrow, noting that he hadn't asked anyone else for this verification. "Certainly," she said, retrieving her phone and showing him the digital boarding pass that clearly displayed her first-class seat assignment. Bradley studied it with obvious skepticism. "This must be a computer error," he declared. First class is fully booked with our regular passengers. There's no error, Captain. I received a complimentary upgrade at check-in, Jasmine explained patiently. That's highly unlikely, Bradley scoffed. Our system doesn't just hand out first-class upgrades to. He paused, his gaze flickering over her casual attire, economy passengers. The implication was clear, and several passengers were now openly watching the interaction. Jasmine felt a familiar heat rising in her chest, the same feeling she'd experienced countless times when facing discrimination. But years of navigating predominantly white corporate spaces had taught her to channel that emotion productively. The upgrade was processed automatically, Captain. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'd still like that glass of water. Her voice remained steady, professional. Bradley's face flushed. He wasn't accustomed to being challenged, especially not by someone he'd already categorized as unworthy of his first-class cabin. I think you'd be more comfortable in economy, he said, the suggestion carrying the weight of an order. I appreciate your concern, but I'm quite comfortable right here in the seat assigned to me, Jasmine countered. Several passengers shifted uncomfortably. Others seemed to enjoy the spectacle. Henderson from seat 1C called out, some people just don't know their place, Thomas. Jasmine knew exactly what was happening. She'd seen this dynamic play out in boardrooms, at investor meetings, in exclusive restaurants. But now it was happening on an airline she owned, and she was witnessing it firsthand. Ma'am, I'm the captain of this aircraft, and I have final authority over all passenger seating, Bradley's voice rose slightly. If I determine that you should be reseated for any reason, that's what will happen. Jasmine removed her phone from her pocket again. I understand you have authority, Captain. However, I'm going to record this interaction to ensure there's a clear record of what's occurring. As she held up her phone, Bradley's control snapped. His hand shot out, striking her wrist with enough force to send the phone clattering to the floor. The impact caught her cheek as well, leaving a stinging sensation that momentarily stunned her. A collective gasp rippled through the cabin. Even those who had seemed to side with the captain appeared shocked by the physical contact. You just assaulted me, Jasmine stated, her voice now ice-cold. Bradley seemed momentarily taken aback by his own action, but quickly recovered. You were violating federal regulations by using a recording device during takeoff preparations. I was ensuring compliance with safety protocols. A female passenger in row 3 spoke up. That's not what happened. He hit her because she was recording him being racist. Security to the aircraft, Bradley barked into his radio, ignoring the comment. Disruptive passenger in first class, seat 2A. As Jasmine retrieved her phone from the floor, checking for damage, she realized the confrontation had escalated beyond anything she'd anticipated. She had simply wanted to observe the airline's operations incognito. Now she was about to face airport security, on her own airline. What she didn't yet know was that this incident would catalyze the very changes she had planned to implement gradually. Sometimes transformation required a spark, and Captain Bradley had just provided it. The cabin buzzed with tension as 2 airport security officers boarded the plane. Their blue uniforms and stern expressions added to the charged atmosphere. Captain Bradley immediately approached them, speaking in hushed but animated tones while gesturing toward Jasmine. Officers, thank you for responding promptly, Bradley said loudly enough for the cabin to hear. We have a passenger refusing to comply with crew instructions and disrupting our departure. The security officers, both white men in their 40s, nodded and moved directly to Jasmine's seat. Neither asked for her version of events before the taller officer spoke. Ma'am, we need you to gather your belongings and come with us, he stated flatly. Jasmine remained seated, her expression calm despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. On what grounds am I being removed from this flight? The captain has final authority on this aircraft. If he says you need to leave, the second officer replied. I understand the captain's authority, Jasmine said carefully, aware that every passenger was watching. However, I've done nothing wrong. I have a valid first-class ticket, I've followed all instructions, and the captain physically assaulted me when I attempted to document his discriminatory behavior. The first officer sighed as if dealing with a difficult child. Ma'am, please don't make this harder than it needs to be. Around the cabin, passengers began taking sides. A businessman in row 4 spoke up, she's right. The captain hit her for no reason. I saw it. She was disrupting pre-flight procedures, countered another passenger. The captain was just doing his job. His job includes assaulting black women, asked an elderly woman near the back of first class. The cabin divided almost instantly along racial lines, with most white passengers supporting the captain while passengers of color defended Jasmine. The security officers exchanged glances, clearly unprepared for the complexity of the situation. I'd like to speak with someone from Skyline Management, Jasmine stated firmly. And I'll need the names and badge numbers of both security officers. We don't have time for this, Bradley interjected. Every minute we delay costs the airline thousands of dollars. I'm well aware of the cost implications, Captain, Jasmine replied, a hint of irony in her voice that was lost on everyone but her. The second security officer pulled out a notepad. What's your name, ma'am? Jasmine Williams, she answered, deliberately withholding her title or any indication of her status. She wanted to see how the situation would be handled when they thought she was just an ordinary passenger. The officer's pen paused. Something about the name seemed to register, but he couldn't place it. And can I see some identification, Ms. Williams? As Jasmine reached for her purse, she had a flashback to her earlier days building Terra Nova Tech. She'd been the only black woman at a major investment conference, and security had stopped her 3 times to verify her credentials while white attendees walked past unchallenged. The same dismissive expressions, the same automatic presumption of guilt. She handed over her driver's license but not her business card. Not yet. The security officers conferred quietly, checking something on their radio. The flight attendants began apologizing to other passengers for the delay. Captain Bradley stood with his arms crossed, projecting authority despite having initiated the entire incident. This flight is now delayed, the lead flight attendant announced. We apologize for the inconvenience. Frustrated sighs filled the cabin, many directed pointedly at Jasmine rather than at the captain who had caused the disruption. She should just move to economy so we can take off, someone muttered. Jasmine remained perfectly still, her face betraying none of the calculations running through her mind. As the new owner of Skyline Airways, she could end this with a single sentence. But that would defeat the purpose of her incognito evaluation. More importantly, it would mean any resolution came from her position of power rather than from the airline's existing procedures and personnel making the right decisions. Ms. Williams, the first officer said after returning from a radio conversation, you have 2 options. You can voluntarily deplane and discuss this matter with Skyline representatives at the gate, or we can remove you involuntarily, which will result in potential restrictions on future travel. Jasmine smiled slightly. There's actually a third option. According to Skyline Airways' own Passenger Bill of Rights, Section 4.3, a passenger dispute regarding discriminatory treatment must be addressed by a customer advocacy representative before any removal decision can be finalized. The security officers looked surprised. Most passengers didn't know airline policies in such detail. I don't think that applies in this situation, Bradley said dismissively. It absolutely does apply, Captain, Jasmine countered. And I believe you know that. A standoff ensued, with neither side willing to back down. The first-class cabin had become utterly silent, passengers forgetting their irritation at the delay as they watched the drama unfold. Finally, the taller security officer spoke into his radio again. We need a customer advocacy representative or someone from Skyline Management at Gate 27 immediately. Passenger dispute situation. Bradley's face darkened. He hadn't expected this pushback, especially not from security who typically supported flight crew without question. This is ridiculous, he muttered. 20 years ago, this would never have happened. What exactly wouldn't have happened 20 years ago, Captain? Jasmine asked quietly. A black woman in first class, or a black woman who knows her rights? Bradley didn't answer, but his expression said everything. He retreated to the cockpit, leaving the security officers to maintain their uncomfortable position in the aisle. 10 minutes later, a harried woman in a Skyline Airways blazer hurried down the jetway. Through the open aircraft door, Jasmine could see her speaking with the security officers. "We've contacted the chief operations officer," the security officer informed Jasmine. "She's on her way to handle this situation personally." Jasmine nodded, satisfied. Alexandra Thompson, the COO, reported directly to the board, which now answered to Jasmine. This would be an interesting test of how Skyline's executive team handled discrimination without knowing the new owner was involved. The delayed flight meant dozens of irritated passengers, a disrupted schedule, and potential domino effects throughout the day's operations. But as Jasmine had learned throughout her career, sometimes you had to allow problems to surface before you could truly fix them. Alexandra Thompson rushed through Atlanta International Airport's terminal, her heels clicking against the polished floor. At 43, the chief operations officer of Skyline Airways had handled countless crises, but today's call had sounded particularly urgent. A physical altercation between a captain and a passenger wasn't just bad press, it was potentially catastrophic. "What do we know so far?" she asked her assistant, Michael, who hurried alongside her. Captain Bradley was involved in some kind of dispute with a female passenger in first class. Security was called, but the situation escalated. "The passenger is refusing to deplane and is citing our discrimination policies." Alexandra suppressed a groan. Thomas Bradley was one of their senior pilots, respected for his technical skills but known for his rigid attitudes. She'd had concerns about him before. "Name of the passenger?" "Jasmine Williams," Michael replied, checking his tablet. "No red flags in our system. Actually, she's a platinum-level frequent flyer." Something about the name tugged at Alexandra's memory, but she couldn't place it. Yesterday's board meeting had mentioned a major announcement coming soon, something about new investment. Had Williams been mentioned? As Alexandra approached gate 27, she mentally prepared for damage control. Skyline prided itself on luxury service and exclusive experiences. An incident like this could tarnish their reputation overnight in the age of viral videos. Meanwhile, in a parallel storyline just 24 hours earlier, a very different scene had unfolded in Skyline's corporate headquarters. In the mahogany-paneled boardroom on the 30th floor, champagne had flowed as the board finalized the deal that would save the airline from its financial troubles. "Gentlemen and lady," the board chairman, William Foster, had said, nodding to the lone woman present, "I'm pleased to announce that the acquisition offer has been accepted. 70% of Skyline Airways now belongs to Terra Nova Holdings." "Who exactly is behind Terra Nova?" asked one board member. "I've never heard of them in aviation." "Their CEO is quite the rising star in the tech world," Foster replied with a knowing smile. "And she specifically requested that her identity remain confidential until the formal announcement next week. Only myself and our CEO know the details." "She?" another board member had questioned. "Yes, she," Foster confirmed. "And trust me when I say Skyline is lucky to have her investment. Her vision for the company's future is exactly what we need." The board members had exchanged curious glances but raised their glasses in a toast to their mysterious new owner. None of them could have imagined that less than a day later, she would be sitting in their first-class cabin, experiencing firsthand the problems that plagued the airline. Back in the present, Alexandra arrived at the gate to find 2 security officers, several flight attendants, and a growing crowd of curious onlookers. Captain Bradley had emerged from the aircraft again, his face flushed with barely contained anger. "Alex, thank God you're here," Bradley said, spotting her. "We have a situation with a disruptive passenger refusing to follow crew instructions." Alexandra nodded professionally but didn't immediately accept his characterization. "I'll handle it from here, Captain. Perhaps you should prepare the cockpit for departure once we resolve this. Bradley seemed ready to argue but thought better of it. Fine. But this woman has delayed us by 40 minutes already. The passengers are getting restless. I understand. Give me a moment with her. Alexandra turned to the security officers. Where is Ms. Williams now? Still in her seat, 2A, one officer replied. She's been calm but insistent on speaking with management. Alexandra boarded the aircraft, aware of all eyes following her. In seat 2A, she found a composed black woman in casual clothing, showing no signs of being the disruptive influence Bradley had described. Ms. Williams? I'm Alexandra Thompson, Chief Operations Officer for Skyline Airways. I understand there's been a situation. Jasmine looked up, her expression revealing nothing. Yes, there has been. Your captain physically assaulted me when I attempted to record his discriminatory behavior. Alexandra maintained her professional demeanor despite her internal alarm. That's a serious allegation. Would you be willing to discuss this privately? We can use the lounge while we sort this out. I'm willing to move to discuss this, Jasmine agreed. But I want to be clear that I'm not voluntarily deplaning. This is a meeting to address a complaint, not a removal. Understood, Alexandra said, impressed by the woman's knowledge of airline procedures. Please, follow me. As they exited the aircraft, Bradley stood waiting at the jet bridge. The flight needs to depart, Alex, he said tersely. Put her on the next one if you have to, but we need to get moving. Captain Bradley, I suggest you return to the cockpit and prepare for departure with the new first officer who's on his way, Alexandra replied coolly. We'll need to take your statement later. My statement? She's the one who. That's enough, Captain, Alexandra cut him off. We'll follow proper procedure here. Bradley's face darkened, but he turned and stalked back to the aircraft, muttering under his breath. Alexandra led Jasmine to the premium lounge, finding a private conference room where they could speak undisturbed. Once the door closed behind them, Alexandra's professional smile faded into genuine concern. Ms. Williams, I apologize for whatever occurred on that aircraft. Can you tell me your version of events? Jasmine recounted the incident in precise detail, Bradley's selective greetings, the ignored requests for water, the racist comment from another passenger that Bradley had laughed at, and finally, the physical contact when she tried to record the interaction. As Jasmine spoke, Alexandra took notes, her expression growing increasingly troubled. We take accusations of discrimination extremely seriously, she said when Jasmine finished. I'd like to review the security footage from the aircraft. I'm glad to hear that, Jasmine replied. She pulled out her ID but still didn't reveal her full status. I fly Skyline frequently, and this isn't the first time I've observed concerning behavior, though it is the first time it's been directed at me so blatantly. Alexandra studied the ID, that nagging feeling of recognition growing stronger. Jasmine Williams, where had she heard that name recently? Ms. Williams, I. The door burst open, and Captain Bradley entered without knocking. The replacement first officer is delayed. We need to resolve this now. Alexandra stood, her expression hardening. Captain, this is a private meeting. This is ridiculous, Bradley insisted. You're letting one passenger hold up an entire flight because she couldn't follow simple instructions. What exactly were those instructions, Captain? Jasmine asked calmly. To accept being ignored by the crew. To tolerate racist remarks. To move to economy despite having a valid first-class ticket. Nobody made racist remarks, Bradley scoffed. That's always the first card people like you play when you don't get your way. Alexandra winced at his words. Captain Bradley, that's enough. No, let him continue, Jasmine said, her eyes never leaving Bradley's face. I'm interested in hearing what he means by people like me. Bradley opened his mouth to respond, but Alexandra's phone rang, interrupting the tension. She glanced at the screen. It's the CEO. Excuse me, I need to take this. She stepped aside, speaking in hushed tones. Jasmine could hear only fragments. Yes, sir. Jasmine Williams. No, I didn't realize. Of course, immediately. Alexandra's face had paled when she ended the call. She looked at Jasmine with new understanding, and not a little apprehension. Is there something wrong, Ms. Thompson? Jasmine asked, though she suspected she knew exactly what the call had been about. Did you watch how Alexandra's demeanor changed when she realized who Jasmine might be? Comment 1. If you think Captain Bradley deserves to be fired immediately for his actions, or 2. If you think he should be given a chance to explain himself. Make sure to like this video and subscribe to see more incredible stories of justice being served. What do you think will happen when Jasmine reveals her true identity? Will she seek revenge or justice? Let's continue to find out. The private lounge fell silent after Alexandra ended her call. Captain Bradley, oblivious to the sudden shift in power dynamics, continued his self-justification. Look, I've been flying with Skyline for 27 years, he said, puffing out his chest slightly. I know our passengers, and I know when someone doesn't belong in first class. Alexandra cleared her throat nervously. Captain Bradley, I think we should. No, let's hear the captain's perspective, Jasmine interrupted, her voice calm but firm. I'm curious about these criteria for belonging in first class that apparently supersede having a valid ticket. Bradley gestured dismissively. It's not just about the ticket. It's about maintaining an atmosphere for our premium customers. They expect a certain environment. And that environment doesn't include black women in casual clothing? Jasmine asked pointedly. Don't put words in my mouth, Bradley snapped. This has nothing to do with race. Alexandra interjected, Captain, security footage from the aircraft is being pulled as we speak. Ms. Williams has alleged that you physically struck her when she attempted to record your interaction. She was violating federal regulations about electronic devices during takeoff preparation, Bradley insisted. The seatbelt sign had just been turned on, and several other passengers were still using their phones, Jasmine countered. You didn't approach any of them. Alexandra guided the conversation back to procedure. Ms. Williams, would you be willing to move to a later flight today? With our sincere apologies and appropriate compensation, of course. Before Jasmine could answer, Bradley interjected, she should be thanking us for the upgrade in the first place. These economy passengers think a first-class seat entitles them to special treatment. Jasmine raised an eyebrow. Actually, I'm a platinum-level frequent flyer with Skyline. I've logged over 100,000 miles with your airline in the past year alone. This revelation seemed to momentarily confuse Bradley. He hadn't expected this casually dressed black woman to be one of Skyline's top customers. Nevertheless, he recovered quickly, crew instructions must be followed, regardless of your status. Alexandra's tablet pinged with an incoming message. The security footage has been accessed, she announced, turning the screen so they could all view it. The video clearly showed the sequence of events on the aircraft. Bradley selectively greeting passengers. Jasmine being ignored when requesting water. Bradley confronting her when she stood. And most damning of all, his hand clearly making contact with her as she raised her phone. Alexandra's expression grew grave. Captain Bradley, this footage contradicts your version of events. The angle is misleading, Bradley protested, though his confidence had visibly diminished. It shows you striking a passenger, Alexandra stated flatly. That alone is grounds for immediate suspension pending investigation. Bradley's face flushed with anger. This is absurd. One passenger makes accusations, and suddenly my entire career is in jeopardy. Multiple passengers corroborated Ms. Williams' account, Alexandra reminded him. And the video evidence is quite clear. Jasmine had remained silent during this exchange, observing Alexandra's handling of the situation. So far, the COO was responding appropriately, though though Jasmine noted she'd only taken action after seeing the video evidence, not on Jasmine's word alone. "Ms. Williams," Alexandra turned to her, "I want to personally apologize for this experience. This behavior does not reflect Skyline's values or policies." "Doesn't it?" Jasmine asked quietly. "Because from what I've observed as a frequent passenger, this isn't an isolated incident. The culture starts at the top." Alexandra looked uncomfortable with this broader indictment of the airline. "We have strict anti-discrimination policies." "Policies are meaningless without consistent enforcement," Jasmine interrupted. "How many complaints have been filed against Captain Bradley before today?" The question hung in the air. Alexandra's hesitation told Jasmine everything she needed to know. "That's confidential personnel information," Bradley said stiffly. "Not for much longer," Jasmine replied cryptically. Alexandra's tablet pinged again with another message. She read it quickly, her eyes widening slightly. "Ms. Williams, our CEO has requested to join this discussion via video conference immediately. Would that be acceptable to you?" Jasmine nodded, curious to see how the CEO would handle the situation. She still hadn't revealed her ownership status, wanting to observe how the executives would respond without that knowledge. As Alexandra set up the video call, Bradley leaned against the wall, arms crossed defensively. He clearly expected the CEO to back him up, to prioritize the veteran pilot over a passenger, regardless of the evidence. The screen flickered to life, revealing Robert Kincaid, Skyline CEO, looking uncharacteristically nervous. "Ms. Williams," he began, "I've just been briefed on the incident. On behalf of Skyline Airways, I want to extend our most sincere apologies." Bradley straightened, surprised by the CEO's immediate capitulation. "Sir, if I could explain." "Not now, Thomas," Kincaid cut him off sharply. "Ms. Williams, I understand you've been misidentified as just a passenger throughout this incident." Alexandra looked confused. "Misidentified?" Jasmine decided it was time. She reached into her bag and removed a business card, sliding it across the table to Alexandra. "Perhaps this will clarify things." Alexandra read the card, her face draining of color. You're the CEO of Terranova Tech." "I am," Jasmine confirmed. "I don't understand," Bradley interjected. "What does some tech company have to do with this?" Kincaid's voice came through the speaker. "Captain Bradley, as of yesterday afternoon, Terranova Holdings acquired a 70% stake in Skyline Airways. Ms. Williams is our new majority owner." The silence that followed was absolute. Bradley's face went through a rapid succession of expressions, disbelief, shock, and finally, dawning horror as he realized the magnitude of his mistake. That's impossible," he finally stammered. "The airline can't have been sold without the employees knowing." "The board voted unanimously," Kincaid explained. "The public announcement was scheduled for next week, but circumstances have obviously changed." Bradley looked like a man watching his career disintegrate before his eyes. "I didn't. I couldn't have known." "That's precisely the point, Captain," Jasmine said, her voice level. "You shouldn't treat any passenger the way you treated me, regardless of who they are or what they own." Alexandra sat perfectly still, processing the revelation. Yesterday's board meeting suddenly made sense, the mysterious investor, the confidentiality agreements, the hints about new leadership. "Ms. Williams," she said carefully, "had you boarded that flight specifically to evaluate our service?" "I had," Jasmine confirmed. "I believe in experiencing a company's operations firsthand before implementing changes. Today's experience has been illuminating." Bradley pushed away from the wall. "This is a setup. You deliberately dressed down and provoked a reaction." "I dressed comfortably for a 5-hour flight," Jasmine corrected him. "The only provocation was my presence in a space you deemed inappropriate for someone who looks like me." On the screen, CEO Kincaid looked increasingly uncomfortable. "Captain Bradley," you should return to the terminal. Your flight will be reassigned to another crew. Please report to HR immediately. You're grounding me. Over this? Bradley's voice rose in disbelief. Over assaulting our majority owner? Yes, Thomas, you're grounded, Kincaid confirmed, his tone leaving no room for argument. As Bradley stormed out, slamming the door behind him, Jasmine turned her attention to Alexandra. Ms. Thompson, I'd like to continue our discussion about Skyline's culture. I think you and I have much to talk about. Alexandra nodded, still processing the power shift that had occurred in the last 5 minutes. Of course, Ms. Williams. Or should I say, Ms. Williams, ma'am? Jasmine is fine, she replied with a slight smile. Now, tell me about the other discrimination complaints you've received. Not just against Captain Bradley, but throughout the airline. Alexandra hesitated, looking toward the screen where Kincaid still watched. He nodded almost imperceptibly. There have been several, Alexandra admitted. Most are handled quietly, with settlements and NDAs. That ends today, Jasmine stated firmly. No more burying complaints. No more protecting employees who violate our values, regardless of their seniority. Our values? Alexandra repeated, noting the shift in language. Yes, our values, Jasmine confirmed. I didn't buy Skyline just as an investment. I bought it to transform it. The revelation had begun, but for Jasmine, this was just the first step in a much larger plan. The airline industry was about to experience a seismic shift, starting with one first-class cabin where a captain had made the mistake of judging a passenger by her appearance. The atmosphere in the private lounge had transformed entirely. Where Captain Bradley had once dominated the space with his authority, Jasmine now commanded attention without raising her voice. Alexandra Thompson sat attentively across from her, occasionally glancing at CEO Robert Kincaid on the video screen, who looked increasingly uncomfortable. Let me be clear about something, Jasmine said, placing her hands flat on the table. I didn't reveal my identity to embarrass anyone or to receive special treatment. I'm doing so because this incident highlights exactly why I acquired Skyline Airways. May I ask why you chose our airline specifically? Alexandra ventured carefully. Jasmine's expression remained neutral, but her eyes conveyed intensity. I've flown over 3 million miles in my career, Ms. Thompson. I've experienced every major carrier, and I've observed patterns. Skyline has exceptional technical operations but a problematic culture. The disconnect between your diversity marketing campaigns and the actual passenger experience is glaring. Kincaid cleared his throat on the video screen. We've invested significantly in diversity initiatives over the past year. Surface-level initiatives, Jasmine cut in. Changing advertisements to show diverse faces while maintaining systems that discriminate isn't progress, Mr. Kincaid. It's performative. Alexandra winced slightly but didn't disagree. As a woman who had climbed to an executive position in the male-dominated airline industry, she had witnessed the gap between Skyline's public image and its internal reality. What are your plans for the airline, Ms. Williams? She asked. First, I need to understand the full scope of the problems, Jasmine replied. Today's incident wasn't isolated, was it? Alexandra glanced at Kincaid, who nodded reluctantly. No, she admitted. We've had several complaints about discriminatory treatment, particularly in premium cabins. Captain Bradley has been the subject of 3 formal complaints in the past year alone. Yet he remained in his position, Jasmine observed. He's a senior pilot with an otherwise exemplary technical record, Kincaid explained weakly. So Skyline prioritizes technical skills over treating passengers with dignity and respect? Jasmine's question hung in the air. Before either executive could respond, Alexandra's phone chimed with an incoming message. She read it quickly, her expression growing concerned. Captain Bradley is giving a statement to airport staff. He's claiming he was set up and unfairly targeted. Of course he is, Jasmine said, unsurprised. People rarely recognize their own biases, especially when those biases have been reinforced by systems that protect them. She thought back to her own journey building Terra Nova Tech. As a black woman in Silicon Valley, she'd faced countless Bradley types, men who questioned her credentials, dismissed her ideas, or assumed she was support staff rather than the founder. Each encounter had strengthened her resolve to create change from a position of power. Ms. Thompson, call your public relations team, Jasmine instructed. They need to prepare a statement acknowledging the incident and outlining immediate steps we're taking to address it. Alexandra noted that Jasmine was already speaking as the owner, not just a passenger. What should the statement include? The truth, Jasmine said simply. That a Skyline captain physically assaulted a passenger after displaying discriminatory behavior, that he has been removed from duty pending investigation, and that the airline is conducting a comprehensive review of its culture and practices. Kincaid looked alarmed. Ms. Williams, publicly acknowledging such an incident could damage Skyline's reputation. With all due respect, Mr. Kincaid, the incident happened in front of a cabin full of witnesses with phones. It's already public. Our choice isn't whether to address it, but how. As if to emphasize her point, Alexandra's tablet pinged with another notification. She turned it to show a social media post already circulating, a passenger's account of the confrontation, complete with blurry photos. This is exactly why I advised investing in better customer service training last quarter, Alexandra said to Kincaid, a hint of frustration breaking through her professional demeanor. Jasmine noted this exchange with interest. Perhaps Alexandra had been pushing for changes internally without support from above. Ms. Thompson, Jasmine said, I'd like you to accompany me to meet with the passengers from that flight. They deserve an explanation for the delay and compensation for their inconvenience. Of course, Alexandra agreed readily. Mr. Kincaid, Jasmine continued, turning to the screen, please have your assistant send me all discrimination complaints filed against Skyline in the past 5 years, along with their resolutions. I'll review them this afternoon. The CEO blinked in surprise at the directness of the request. Some of those are bound by confidentiality agreements, which don't apply to the company's owner, Jasmine finished for him. I need to understand the full scope of what we're dealing with. As they prepared to leave the lounge, the door opened again. Captain Bradley stood there, his face flushed and a security officer behind him. I demand to be part of this conversation, he said, his earlier confidence now tinged with desperation. My career is on the line. Your career became uncertain the moment you struck a passenger, Captain, Jasmine replied calmly. The fact that the passenger happens to own the airline is irrelevant to the fundamental breach of conduct. You can't just take over an airline and start firing people who've dedicated their lives to it, Bradley protested. I'm not firing anyone yet, Jasmine clarified. I'm insisting on a thorough investigation and appropriate consequences. Something that should have happened after your first discrimination complaint. Bradley's expression shifted, revealing that he knew exactly which complaints she was referring to. Those were misunderstandings, taken out of context. 3 separate misunderstandings, with 3 separate passengers of color? Alexandra asked, her professional reserve cracking slightly. This is a witch hunt, Bradley insisted. Jasmine stood, gathering her belongings. No, Captain Bradley. This is accountability. Something that's been lacking at Skyline for too long. As they left the lounge, Alexandra walking beside her, Jasmine noticed other Skyline employees watching them pass. Word was spreading quickly. Ms. Thompson, Jasmine said quietly, how many other employees do you think share Captain Bradley's attitudes? Alexandra considered the question carefully. Not the majority, but enough to influence the culture. And many more who stay silent because they don't feel empowered to speak up. That's what we need to change first, Jasmine decided. Not just removing the worst offenders, but creating an environment where everyone feels responsible for maintaining the standard of respect. As they approached the gate area, they could see the delayed passengers gathered around, many looking frustrated. Some were filming with their phones, having caught wind that something significant was happening. "Are you ready for this?" Alexandra asked, gesturing toward the crowd. Jasmine straightened her shoulders, the casual hoodie and jeans now seeming like a deliberate choice rather than an attempt at anonymity. "I've been ready for this my entire career, Ms. Thompson." As they stepped into view of the waiting passengers, a murmur ran through the crowd. Someone recognized Jasmine from tech industry news and pointed. The whispers spread quickly, "That's Jasmine Williams. Terra Nova Tech. Billionaire. She owns Skyline now." The power had shifted, not through grand announcements or press releases, but through a single confrontation that exposed the fault lines running through the company. Captain Bradley had expected his authority to go unchallenged, especially by a black woman in casual clothes. Instead, he had inadvertently accelerated the very changes Jasmine had planned to implement gradually. As she prepared to address the waiting passengers, Jasmine felt a familiar determination settling over her. The same feeling she'd had when launching Terra Nova against overwhelming odds. The same resolve that had carried her through rooms where she was the only woman, the only person of color, the only one expected to fail. "Good afternoon," she began, her voice carrying across the gate area. "My name is Jasmine Williams, and as of yesterday, I am the majority owner of Skyline Airways. I want to personally apologize for today's delay and explain what happened." The transformation of Skyline Airways had officially begun. By late afternoon, the ripples from the morning's confrontation had spread throughout Atlanta International Airport and beyond. Flight 372 had been officially cancelled, with passengers rebooked on other Skyline flights or competitor airlines. Compensation packages had been personally authorized by Jasmine, premium upgrades, flight vouchers, and meal allowances that exceeded Skyline's standard disruption protocols. In the executive lounge, now converted into an impromptu command center, Jasmine sat surrounded by tablets, laptops, and increasingly anxious Skyline executives who had been summoned from various departments. "The video has 300,000 views already," reported Gerald Fisher, Skyline's head of public relations, his forehead glistening with sweat. "It's been picked up by several news outlets." On the largest screen, they watched a cell phone video capturing the moment when Captain Bradley had struck Jasmine. The footage was grainy but unmistakable, his hand connecting with her as she raised her phone, the shocked reactions of nearby passengers. "We need to get ahead of this," Gerald continued, already reaching for his phone. "I can call some friendly journalists, suggest that the angle was misleading." "No," Jasmine interrupted firmly. "We will not deny what clearly happened. Our response needs to acknowledge the incident and outline specific steps we're taking to address both this situation and the underlying issues." Gerald looked to Alexandra and Kincaid for support, but found none. The power dynamics in the room had realigned around Jasmine with remarkable speed. "What are those steps, exactly?" asked Diane Reeves, the airline's general counsel, who had arrived 30 minutes earlier and had been quietly assessing the legal ramifications. "First, Captain Bradley is suspended pending a full investigation," Jasmine stated. "Second, we're launching a comprehensive review of all discrimination complaints filed against Skyline in the past 5 years. Third, we're implementing immediate anti-bias training for all customer-facing staff, starting with flight crews." Diane scribbled notes rapidly. "The pilots' union will fight the suspension." "Let them," Jasmine replied calmly. "We have video evidence of a physical assault. That transcends any union protection." As if on cue, Alexandra's phone buzzed with an incoming call. "It's James Washington from the Pilots Association," she reported after checking the screen. "Put him on speaker," Jasmine instructed. Washington's voice filled the room, tense and defensive. "Alexandra, what the hell is going on? I'm hearing Bradley's been suspended over some misunderstanding with a passenger." "It wasn't a misunderstanding, James," Alexandra replied. "Captain Bradley physically struck a passenger who was recording his discriminatory behavior. The incident was witnessed by multiple people and captured on video. These things are often taken out of context, Washington insisted. Bradley's got an exemplary 27-year record with Skyline. Mr. Washington, Jasmine interjected, this is Jasmine Williams, Skyline's new majority owner. I was the passenger Captain Bradley assaulted. A lengthy silence followed this revelation. Ms. Williams, Washington finally responded, his tone markedly more cautious, I wasn't aware, that is, the association hasn't been formally notified of any ownership changes. The board approved the acquisition yesterday, Jasmine informed him. The public announcement was scheduled for next week, but circumstances have accelerated our timeline. I see. Washington paused again. Well, regardless of ownership, the association has procedures for addressing allegations against our members. So does Skyline Airways, Jasmine countered. And those procedures clearly state that physical contact with a passenger results in immediate suspension pending investigation. We're following our own protocols, Mr. Washington. Another silence, then, we'll need to discuss this further. My office will contact you tomorrow to schedule that discussion, Jasmine said before ending the call. The executives exchanged glances. None of them had seen the Pilots Association handled so directly before. Meanwhile, Jasmine's assistant had set up a secure video conference with Skyline's board members, most of whom were just learning about the morning's events. Their reactions ranged from shock to calculation as they processed the implications. This could seriously damage our reputation, said board member Victor Harrington, his silver hair and stern expression reflecting his 40 years in the industry. Our reputation was already damaged, Jasmine responded. You just weren't seeing it from the perspective of passengers who experience discrimination. With all due respect, Ms. Williams, another board member interjected, isolated incidents don't reflect our overall service standards. 3 formal complaints against Captain Bradley alone in the past year suggest it's not isolated, Jasmine countered. And those are just the passengers who took the time to file official reports. How many others simply vowed never to fly Skyline again? The data specialist she brought from Terra Nova was already analyzing Skyline's customer feedback database. Preliminary keyword analysis shows references to discrimination or racial bias in approximately 8% of negative reviews over the past 18 months, he reported. That's significantly higher than industry average. This statistic silenced further objections from the board. Throughout the afternoon, Jasmine moved methodically through meetings and briefings, her casual attire now a stark contrast to the formal business wear of the executives surrounding her. Yet no one questioned her authority or expertise as she dissected operational procedures, employee training protocols, and customer service metrics. By early evening, social media had exploded with the story. The hashtag #SkylineSlap was trending nationally. Former Skyline employees began sharing their own experiences with the airline's culture, many specifically mentioning Captain Bradley's history of problematic behavior. Look at this, Alexandra said, showing Jasmine her tablet. A former flight attendant had posted a detailed account of working under Bradley, describing how he routinely gave preferential treatment to white, male, well-dressed passengers while scrutinizing others. Contact her, Jasmine instructed. Offer confidentiality and ask if she's willing to provide a formal statement. As night fell, Jasmine finally took a moment to herself, standing at the window of the executive suite overlooking the illuminated runways. Aircraft took off and landed in a choreographed dance, representing the technical excellence that had initially attracted her to Skyline. The airline's operational systems were impeccable, it was the human systems that needed transformation. Her phone buzzed with a notification. Bradley had given an interview to a conservative news outlet, painting himself as the victim of cancel culture and reverse discrimination. He claimed he'd been set up by a corporate raider looking to make an example of him. Jasmine smiled slightly. Bradley's defensive reaction was playing directly into her strategy. Rather than engaging with his narrative, she had spent the day focusing on structural changes and gathering data. While he fought for his reputation, she was rebuilding the company. Alexandra joined her at the window. It's been quite a first day of ownership, she observed. Not what I had planned, Jasmine admitted. But sometimes catalysts for change arrive unexpectedly. The executive team is impressed with how you've handled this, Alexandra said. Even those who were skeptical initially. And you? Jasmine asked. What do you think about the direction we're taking? Alexandra considered the question carefully. I think it's overdue. I've been pushing for some of these changes for years, but without the authority to implement them fully. Jasmine nodded. She had suspected as much from observing Alexandra throughout the day. That's why I'd like you to lead the Cultural Transformation Initiative. You understand both the problems and the potential. Alexandra looked surprised but pleased by the offer. I'd be honored. Though it won't be an easy road. There are many Captain Bradleys embedded throughout the organization. I didn't build Terra Nova by taking the easy road, Jasmine replied with a slight smile. And I didn't buy Skyline expecting instant transformation. But today has shown me something important. When leadership is clear about its values and backs them with action, people who've been silenced find their voices. As if to illustrate her point, Alexandra's tablet chimed with new messages, dozens of Skyline employees reaching out to share their experiences and offer support for the changes being implemented. The ripple effect had begun, moving outward from a single confrontation in a first-class cabin to touch every aspect of the organization. What Captain Bradley had intended as an assertion of his authority had instead become the catalyst for its redistribution. Jasmine turned from the window, ready to continue the work. Schedule a company-wide town hall for tomorrow, she instructed. It's time for everyone at Skyline to hear directly from their new owner. 1 week after the incident, Skyline Airways' largest conference center was filled to capacity. Employees from every department sat in neat rows, their expressions a mixture of curiosity, apprehension, and anticipation. On stage, a simple podium stood empty, flanked by the Skyline logo, a stylized silver wing against a blue background. At precisely 9 o'clock, Jasmine Williams walked onto the stage. She had traded her casual attire for a tailored navy suit, but maintained the same confident, measured demeanor that had characterized her handling of the crisis. Good morning, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the sound system. For those who haven't heard by now, my name is Jasmine Williams. I'm the founder and CEO of Terra Nova Tech, and as of last week, I became the majority owner of Skyline Airways. A murmur rippled through the audience, some had still thought the rumors might be exaggerated. My introduction to many of you came through unusual circumstances, Jasmine continued. What should have been a routine flight became a public demonstration of issues that have been affecting this airline for years. Today, I want to speak candidly about those issues and the changes we're implementing to address them. For the next 20 minutes, Jasmine shared her personal experiences, not just from last week's confrontation, but from years of flying as a black woman in an industry where the customer experience often varied dramatically based on appearance, race, and perceived status. I've been asked why I chose to fly incognito rather than announcing my ownership immediately, she said. The answer is simple, I wanted to experience Skyline as your customers do. Not as a VIP receiving special treatment, but as an ordinary passenger. In the audience, flight attendants exchanged glances. Ground crew members nodded in understanding. Even some pilots, those who hadn't aligned themselves with Bradley, seemed receptive to her message. Captain Thomas Bradley and several executives have been suspended pending our investigation, Jasmine announced, addressing the question that had dominated company gossip for days. This isn't about punishing individuals, but about examining the systems that allowed discriminatory behavior to continue unchecked. She clicked to the next slide in her presentation, displaying a graph of discrimination complaints filed against Skyline over the past 5 years. The trend line showed a steady increase. This data tells us something important, Jasmine explained. Either discriminatory incidents are increasing, or passengers are becoming more willing to report them. Either way, our response has been insufficient. From the corner of her eye, Jasmine could see CEO Robert Kincaid shifting uncomfortably in his seat. The data directly contradicted his previous assurances to the board that such incidents were isolated and promptly addressed. Today, I'm announcing several immediate changes, Jasmine continued. First, a comprehensive review of all customer-facing policies to eliminate language that enables bias treatment. Second, mandatory anti-bias training for all staff, beginning with flight crews and gate agents. Third, the creation of a passenger advocacy office with direct reporting lines to executive leadership. Alexandra Thompson, seated in the front row, nodded approvingly. Many of these initiatives had been in her proposed budget for years, only to be delayed or diluted by financial concerns. I understand that change can be unsettling, Jasmine acknowledged. Some of you may worry that addressing these issues head-on might damage Skyline's reputation. But I believe the opposite is true. By confronting our problems honestly and implementing meaningful solutions, we strengthen our brand and earn authentic customer loyalty. As Jasmine opened the floor for questions, a pilot in the third row stood up. Ms. Williams, with respect, many of us feel that Captain Bradley is being made a scapegoat for larger industry problems. His actions may have been inappropriate, but a 27-year career shouldn't end over one mistake. Jasmine studied the man carefully before responding. I appreciate your loyalty to your colleague. However, characterizing what happened as one mistake misrepresents the situation. Our review has uncovered multiple complaints against Captain Bradley over the years, all handled through private settlements and confidentiality agreements. She clicked to another slide, displaying a redacted list of incidents. This isn't about one mistake. It's about a pattern of behavior that was enabled by a system designed to protect the company rather than correct the problem. Another employee, a flight attendant, raised her hand. Some of us have been trying to report these issues for years. Will there be protection for whistleblowers under the new policies? Absolutely, Jasmine confirmed. We're establishing an independent ethics office where employees can report concerns without fear of retaliation. And we're reviewing past cases where employees may have faced consequences for speaking up. Throughout the morning, Jasmine fielded dozens of questions, never deflecting or providing corporate platitudes. When she didn't know an answer, she said so directly and promised to follow up. When challenging questions arose, she addressed them head-on. Meanwhile, outside Skyline's corporate walls, the public narrative continued to evolve. Captain Bradley had become increasingly vocal, giving interviews to sympathetic media outlets that painted him as a victim of woke capitalism. I'm being punished for maintaining standards, he claimed in one particularly viral segment. This new owner wants to lower the bar in the name of diversity. Rather than engaging directly with these attacks, Jasmine focused on substantive change. While Bradley fought in the court of public opinion, she methodically rebuilt Skyline's internal culture. The afternoon following the town hall, Jasmine met privately with a group of black employees who had requested time to share their experiences. For 2 hours, she listened as flight attendants, gate agents, and ground crew described subtle and overt discrimination they'd faced from both passengers and colleagues. I was passed over for promotion 3 times, one senior flight attendant explained. Each time, the position went to someone with less experience but the right look according to my supervisor. A first-class passenger once asked me if I was lost when I tried to serve him, another shared. My white colleague had to confirm I was actually assigned to the cabin. Jasmine took notes throughout, occasionally asking clarifying questions but mostly listening. These perspectives would directly inform the policy changes being developed. By week's end, Bradley had escalated his counterattack, filing a wrongful suspension lawsuit claiming discrimination against traditional values. His legal team requested access to Jasmine's communications, suggesting the entire incident had been orchestrated to facilitate a takeover. Diane Reeves, Skyline's general counsel, brought the lawsuit documents to Jasmine's temporary office overlooking the operations center. He's claiming you targeted him specifically because he represents old-school professionalism in the industry, Diane explained, unable to keep the skepticism from her voice. Let him, Jasmine replied calmly. Our response should focus on the facts. The video evidence, the prior complaints, the witness statements. No personal attacks, no speculation about his motives. The media will eat this up, Diane warned. Veteran pilot versus tech billionaire. They'll frame it as tradition versus disruption. They can frame it however they want, Jasmine said. We're playing a longer game. While they're distracted by the drama, we're changing the system that produced it. True to her word, Jasmine refused to engage in public mudslinging. When reporters requested comments on Bradley's allegations, Skyline's new communications team provided factual statements about the company's commitment to equitable treatment for all passengers and employees. Internally, the transformation continued. Working groups were formed to review everything from hiring practices to service protocols. Alexandra led an audit of the company's approach to passenger complaints, discovering that discrimination reports were routinely classified as customer satisfaction issues, rather than potential civil rights violations. As the second week of Jasmine's ownership drew to a close, the airline industry watched closely. Competitors wondered if Skyline's public reckoning would damage the brand or strengthen it. Analysts debated whether a tech executive could successfully transition to the complex world of aviation. Throughout it all, Jasmine maintained the same focused determination that had built Terra Nova from a startup into a tech giant. She understood something that Captain Bradley and his supporters did not: this wasn't just about one incident or one airline. It was about confronting systemic patterns that persisted throughout the industry and beyond. The confrontation that had begun in a first-class cabin was now challenging an entire system of assumptions about who belonged in which spaces and who had the authority to decide. The outcome would reshape not just Skyline Airways, but potentially the standards for the entire industry. 6 months after the confrontation that had unexpectedly thrust Skyline Airways into the spotlight, Jasmine Williams stood on the tarmac of San Francisco International Airport. Behind her gleamed the newly repainted flagship aircraft of the fleet, its fuselage bearing the reimagined Skyline logo, the original silver wing now accompanied by a spectrum of colors representing diversity and inclusion. Today marks not just a rebranding, but a recommitment. Jasmine addressed the gathered crowd of employees, media, and industry representatives. 6 months ago, Skyline Airways faced a moment of truth. Today, we demonstrate how we've transformed that moment into lasting change. The transformation had indeed been remarkable. Bradley's lawsuit had collapsed spectacularly when additional evidence emerged, former colleagues coming forward with contemporaneous notes documenting his behavior, passenger complaints that had been buried in the system, and most damaging, recordings of his own discriminatory comments in the cockpit that another pilot had preserved. Bradley now worked for a small regional carrier, his reputation following him despite his efforts to reframe the narrative. Meanwhile, Skyline had implemented the most comprehensive anti-discrimination framework in the industry, becoming a case study for corporate transformation. Our passenger satisfaction scores have increased 27%, Jasmine continued, gesturing to the infographic displayed on screens throughout the event space. Employee retention has improved 32%. And our market share has grown in every region we serve. The statistics told a compelling story. Addressing discrimination hadn't hurt the business, it had strengthened it. Passengers who had previously avoided Skyline due to negative experiences or reputational concerns were returning. Employees who had felt marginalized were now fully engaged. Alexandra Thompson, now promoted to President of Operations, stood nearby, pride evident in her expression. Under Jasmine's ownership, she had finally received the authority and resources to implement the changes she had advocated for years. For our inaugural flight under the renewed Skyline brand, I'm pleased to announce a special captain, Jasmine said, building to the surprise she had kept secret even from most executives. She stepped back from the podium and removed her blazer, revealing the crisp white shirt and epaulets of a Skyline pilot's uniform. A murmur of surprise rippled through the crowd. Many of you don't know that before founding Terra Nova Tech, I earned my commercial pilot's license, Jasmine explained. I've maintained my certifications and completed Skyline's training program over the past month. Today, I'll be serving as captain on our inaugural flight from San Francisco to Atlanta, the same route where our journey began 6 months ago. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone present. The black woman who had been told she didn't belong in first class was now literally taking the controls of the aircraft. As she prepared to board, Jasmine took a moment to speak with some of the executives who had been skeptical of her vision initially. "I have to admit, I had my doubts," confessed Victor Harrington, the board member who had worried most vocally about reputational damage. "I thought addressing these issues so publicly would drive customers away. I was wrong. Many people make the same mistake," Jasmine replied without judgment. "They confuse avoiding problems with solving them." Nearby, a diverse group of Skyline employees chatted animatedly. The airline's workforce had always had racial diversity at lower levels, but now that diversity extended into management and executive positions. More importantly, the culture had shifted to value different perspectives rather than expecting conformity to a single standard. As Jasmine climbed the steps to the aircraft, she reflected on the journey. The confrontation with Bradley hadn't been part of her original plan, but it had accelerated necessary changes. Sometimes transformation required a catalyst, a moment when the underlying problems became impossible to ignore. Inside the cockpit, Jasmine went through the pre-flight checklist with methodical precision. Her first officer, a young woman who had recently been promoted from the regional division, worked alongside her with professional efficiency. "Captain Williams," the first officer said, still sounding slightly odd, "all systems are green." "Thank you, First Officer Chen," Jasmine replied. "Let's prepare for boarding." The first-class cabin filled with a diverse group of passengers, different races, ages, clothing styles, all receiving the same respectful service from the flight crew. The atmosphere was relaxed yet professional, a stark contrast to the tension that had permeated the same space 6 months earlier. Alexandra made a final visit to the cockpit before takeoff. "Everything set for the big moment?" "All ready," Jasmine confirmed. "How are things on the ground?" "The transition team has successfully implemented all Phase 1 changes," Alexandra reported. "Phase 2 initiatives are proceeding ahead of schedule." "And the employee feedback?" Alexandra smiled. "Overwhelmingly positive. The anonymous survey showed 92% support for the new direction. Even some of Bradley's former allies have come around after seeing the results." Jasmine nodded, satisfied. The metrics were important, but the cultural shift was what truly mattered, the feeling that every employee and passenger deserved equal respect, regardless of appearance or background. As the boarding completed and the doors closed, Jasmine picked up the announcement microphone. "Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is Captain Jasmine Williams speaking. Welcome aboard Skyline Airways Flight 1001, from San Francisco to Atlanta." The symbolism of the flight number, 1001, had been her idea. One beyond 1,000. A new beginning. "Today marks a special journey for Skyline Airways," she continued. 6 months ago, an incident on one of our flights sparked a transformation. Today, we're proud to demonstrate that transformation in action. As the aircraft pushed back from the gate, Jasmine caught sight of a figure watching from the terminal windows. With a start, she recognized Thomas Bradley, his silver hair unmistakable even at a distance. He must have come to witness the rebranding event, perhaps to see firsthand what had become of the airline he had once considered his domain. Their eyes met briefly across the distance, the former captain who had judged her unworthy of first class and the new owner who now literally controlled the aircraft's trajectory. Bradley turned away first, disappearing into the terminal as Skyline's flagship plane taxied toward the runway. Jasmine focused her attention forward, where it belonged. The past 6 months had never been about Bradley personally, despite his efforts to make it so. It had been about dismantling a system that enabled his behavior and replacing it with something better. As the aircraft accelerated down the runway, Jasmine felt the familiar thrill of takeoff, that perfect moment when human ingenuity defied gravity. Building Terra Nova had given her a similar feeling. So had transforming Skyline. The satisfaction of overcoming resistance, of creating something that exceeded expectations. Positive rate, called the first officer as the wheels left the ground. Gear up, Jasmine responded, executing the standard procedure with practiced precision. The aircraft climbed steadily into the clear blue sky, banking gently toward Atlanta. In the passenger cabin, people who might never have interacted in the old Skyline environment now shared the same space with equal status and dignity. It wasn't perfect. Transformation never was. There would be resistance and setbacks, moments when old habits reasserted themselves. But the direction had been irrevocably changed, and with each passing day, the new culture grew stronger. As the aircraft leveled at cruising altitude, Jasmine engaged the autopilot and took a moment to appreciate the view. From 35,000 feet, the patchwork landscape below revealed patterns invisible from the ground, connections and contrasts, natural boundaries and human ones. 6 months ago, a SLAP intended to reinforce artificial boundaries had instead helped dismantle them. The ordinary passenger who wasn't supposed to be in first class now commanded the entire operation, transforming not just one airline but setting a new standard for an industry. Some called it justice. Jasmine called it progress. This powerful story reminds us that true change requires more than surface-level diversity initiatives. Jasmine didn't just confront Captain Bradley, she transformed an entire system that enabled his behavior. The incident teaches us that discrimination often hides behind standards and traditions that serve only to maintain existing power structures. When Jasmine experienced racism firsthand, she could have immediately revealed her ownership and punished Bradley. Instead, she chose a more impactful path, using the incident to expose deeper problems and implement meaningful reforms. The story also highlights how authority figures often receive protection despite repeated misconduct, while those who experience discrimination are expected to know their place. Jasmine's strategic approach, observing first, gathering evidence, then implementing systematic change, demonstrates effective leadership. Rather than seeking personal revenge, she focused on creating lasting transformation that would benefit everyone. Perhaps most importantly, the story reveals how bias impacts everyday interactions, from who receives service to who is believed when conflicts arise. By addressing these realities openly rather than hiding behind confidentiality agreements and settlements, Skyline Airways ultimately became stronger, proving that confronting discrimination isn't just morally right, it's good business. What do you think about how Jasmine handled the situation? Would you have revealed your identity immediately, or waited like she did to see how the airline handled discrimination? Comment below with your thoughts. If you enjoyed this story of justice and transformation, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more powerful racism stories that inspire change. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that sometimes, the person you underestimate might just be your boss. Thank you for watching, and remember, in the fight against discrimination, strategic action speaks louder than words. Until next time.